gentlemen, if we can kick-start our proceedings for this roundtable. His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, Comrade Dr. E.D. Mnangagwa, our high-level facilitator, former President of the Republic of Mozambique, His Excellency, Dr. Joaquim Chissano, our champion and President of the African Development Bank Group, Dr. A.A. Adesina, governors of the regional and non-regional member countries of the AFDB. And in this regard, let me especially recognize the Minister of Finance for the Republic of South Africa, Honorable Enoch Gondogwana, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Treasury for Africa and the Middle East, Mr. Eric Mayer, the SADC Executive Secretary, His Excellency Mr. Elias Magosi, Executive Directors of the AFDB, Senior Vice President of the AFDB, Ms. Swazi Chabalala, other members of senior management of the bank here present, honorable ministers from the Republic of Zimbabwe here present, senior government officials, ladies and gentlemen. Your Excellency, with your permission, if you can allow me to call upon the Minister of Finance, Honorable Professor Mthuli Ncube, to give us the opening remarks and his presentation for the evening. Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Clive. His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, Dr. Emmerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa, His Excellency, the former President of the Republic of Mozambique, His Excellency Joaquim Chissano, the President of the African Development Bank Group, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina. I recognize all the governors from the regional member countries, from the non-regional member countries. I see Eric Mayer smiling right there. The Minister of Finance for South Africa is here. I don't know if Honorable Andrew Mitchell is in the room. If he's not, I'm sure he's on his way. I also recognize the SADC Executive Secretary and all of you who are here. They're also ministers from the Republic of Zimbabwe, Honorable Joram Gumbo, Honorable Ziyambi. I also recognize all the executive directors on the African Development Bank board and other senior government officials, bank officials here present. A good evening to you all. It is an honor for me to welcome you to this roundtable on Zimbabwe arrears, clearance, and debt resolution process, and to introduce the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, Dr. Emmerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa. But before I introduce the President, let me just make 2 points. The first point is just about recent economic developments, at least in the last 2 years. And then secondly, just a short update on the arrears, clearance, and debt resolution process. And then thereafter, then I'll ask the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe to make his remarks and keynote address. Colleagues, Zimbabwe has not been immune to the global environment, which has been challenging. In fact, we're probably the one country that watches the US interest rate cycle because we use the US dollar as a domestic currency. So if Eric Mayer, I keep hearing from the Federal Reserve that your interest rate cycle has topped, we are happier because we know that the dollar strength may start waning, and that will help us with our own domestic currency, which is competing with the US dollar. So we keep a watch on global events. Also, we do watch the whole inflation trend, and we've been importing easily 50% of our inflation into the economy. Having said that, I must say that we've been very pleased in the last 3 years. In fact, this is the third year in terms of the recovery that we saw post-COVID. 2021, the economy recorded a growth rate of 8.5% in GDP growth. For 2022, I had a figure of 4%. Just this morning, my economics team says, Minister, we have confirmed the figures. Actually, they're a lot higher, closer to 6%. So it's been good growth, even for 2022. 2023, again, we have a growth rate of the order of 6%. So it's strong growth, I think, good growth in this tough phase in our global world economy. The growth is basically being driven by some critical sectors. Agriculture, where we've seen a very strong recovery in the last 2 years. And it's fair to say that in the last 2 years, really, Zimbabwe has been food secure, both in terms of grain, production, and also wheat production. For the first time in 30 years, Zimbabwe last year produced enough wheat to feed itself. Not a single grain was imported, and we expect the same this year. This year is even in a higher yield. If you want to know how to grow wheat, ask Zimbabweans. We've figured this out, how to grow wheat. So that's agriculture. Then the mining sector, again, has been doing well. And there's some unexpected rewards, especially from the lithium sector. We did not even factor export earnings from that sector. But there it is. That's growing quite nicely. And we've got about 5 key investors in that sector at the moment. Also looking at the sectors such as the platinum sector, coal. We have a lot of coal, by the way. I know we're talking about climate change at the bank at the moment, but Zimbabwe has lots of coal. And we rely on it in terms of our energy supply. The gold exports as well. So right across the board, Zimbabwe has got key minerals which are driving the sector. The sector now easily is worth about $13 billion in revenues. Way back in 2017, the revenues were of the order of 2.7 billion. Now we're talking about revenues of 13 billion. So there's been a major uplift in that sector. It is making its contribution to GDP growth. In terms of infrastructure development, we've built we've built major dams in every province, which explains why we've been able to grow our wheat through irrigation, because it's mainly a winter crop. So that infrastructure development, including road transportation, we've been building roads using domestic resources. All of that has kept up our public sector investment program on track. Our target has been 5% of GDP in terms of expenditure in that sector. We've come close to that, but I must say that overall, we've seen very strong performance from a public sector investment program. Tourism is recovered as well from COVID. If you try to get into Victoria Falls any day, you won't find a room. In fact, you've probably going to stay over in Zambia across the river and come across the bridge every morning to see the Victoria Falls because the tourist destinations are full. In fact, we're running out of hotel space and we need more hotel investment. Looking at the other macro aspects, balance of payments position, for the 4th year in a row, again this year we expect to record a current account surplus. So balance of payments position again remains intact. If we consider both just differential between exports and imports, and then we overlay remittances, which are now closer to $2 billion a year. So that combination is producing a positive balance position in terms of our current account position. On the fiscal front, again, we continue to run basically almost a quasi-cash budgeting system, which has enabled our budget deficit to stay below 2% of GDP per annum. So in the last 4 years, our budget deficit have remained well below 2%. Last year, we recorded 1% budget deficit, and this year again, we expect a very similar figure. And so we've made sure that the fiscal deficit don't become a risk to macroeconomic challenges. But inflation still remains a challenge for us, like in most other countries, because of the development of the power market. As we say, we're in this unique situation where we're using both a domestic currency, the Zimbabwe dollar, and the foreign currency, the US dollar, as both transacting currencies domestically. So that competition is putting pressure on the Zimbabwe dollar. But we are determined to make sure that we instill stability going forward. So that's a big, broad brush on the state of the economy. Colleagues, the one thing that is an albatross around the neck of Zimbabweans, Zimbabwe economy, is the debt, external debt that Zimbabwe currently is battling under. $14 billion worth of external debt. If you add the debt that we've, in terms of a negotiation with the farmers that we want to compensate, that debt goes easily to $17 billion. It's a lot for a small economy such as Zimbabwe. So we've started this process, structured dialogue around arrears clearance. So far, we have had 4 meetings. In fact, today is our 5th meeting, in fact. In this process, His Excellency the President Mnangagwa, has requested Dr. Adeshina to act as champion for this process. And we thank him for agreeing to champion this arrears clearance process. If you can follow me in applauding. Secondly, President Mnangagwa has also appointed the former president of Mozambique, President Chisano, as a high-level facilitator. The way we are structured is as follows. We have taken a whole-of-government approach in dealing with this process as the government of Zimbabwe, and have created 3 working streams: an economic reform stream, an economic governance stream, and a land, land and farmer compensation stream. The economic reforms stream or pillar is co-chaired by the IMF, the World Bank, and myself, the Minister of Finance and Economic Development. The governance pillar is co-chaired by the Minister of Justice, who's over there. You can wave Ziambi, wave it everyone. And then with the EU ambassador. The third pillar is co-chaired by Switzerland, the Swiss ambassador, the Office of the President and Cabinet, Deputy Chief Secretary Manungo. I'm sure he's here somewhere. He can also wave. And then the UNDP under Ambassador Kalon. Who's this one? I'm being reminded that I should recognize His Excellency Chileshe Kapwepwe, the Executive Secretary of COMESA. Is that right? Thank you. Maybe you can wave even higher. Thank you very much. And we have a slot. I think we'll make a few remarks as we progress with the program. So, colleagues, 3 streams. And it's quite clear that this has brought Zimbabwe as the debtor closer to the creditors who are participants in this process. As I say, up to date, we've done 4 meetings. Today is our 5th meeting. Now, where we are headed with this in terms of the roadmap, we would like to get to a position where we can extract certain aspects under the economic reform agenda for input into our staff-monitored program with the IMF, which we'll work on in the next 5 months. Hopefully, we can begin running that, working with the IMF. Once we are done with the staff-monitored program, we hope that then that will lead to the identification of potential sponsors for that magic 24-hour loan, which enables a country, indebted country, to bridge the gap and clear the arrears for the preferred creditors. In your case, it's the World Bank and the African Development Bank. And then once that is done, we can then move on to phase 2, which is the restructuring of the bilateral Paris Club debt. So that's where we are headed with this process. But for now, we continue to make token payments to all our creditors. Everyone is being paid something per quarter. I won't talk about the amounts, but these are token payments meant to show that Zimbabwe wants to be a good debtor and not a bad debtor. A good debtor is one who pays something towards their debt, and we are doing that. Colleagues, I really tried to summarize just a little bit about these areas. Should you wish to know more about the details of the policy matrices that we've come up with under the 3 working streams, economic, governance, land tenure systems, please let us know. We can share those matrices with you, or they are available through your ambassadors in Zimbabwe. Here I'm referring to governors and board members. Colleagues, I now proceed to introduce His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, His Excellency Dr. Emmerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa. President Mnangagwa is actually one of the longest serving, if not the longest serving cabinet minister in Zimbabwe. Of course, now he's higher than cabinet ministers, but he's been in cabinet since 1980, since independence, and he was involved in the liberation movement well before that, since the age of 17. I don't know what you were doing at the age of 17, but he was trying to liberate a country. I won't tell you what I was doing at the age of 17. I will remain silent. So basically, 1980 to 1988, he was Minister of State Security. In 1985, he was elected a member of Parliament. In 1988 to 2000, he was Minister of Justice and Parliamentary Affairs. In fact, you will see the Minister of Justice, Parliamentary Affairs portfolio, it keeps coming up. He was Minister for 3 different periods. He was also Minister of Finance at some point, 95-96. He was Speaker of Parliament for 5 years, 2000-2005. Minister of Rural Housing and Social Amenities, 2005-2009. He was Minister of Defense in 2009 to 2013. And then again, Minister of Justice and Parliamentary Affairs in 2013 to 2014. He was then appointed Vice President of the Republic of Zimbabwe and Minister of Justice concurrently in 2014, and then the interim president in August, from November 2017 to August 2018, and president of Zimbabwe after the election in 2018. President Mnangagwa has championed the revival of the Zimbabwe economy through Vision 2030, and the document for enactment being the National Development Strategy 1, which runs for the first 5 years up to 2025, and then another 5 years up to 2030, completing the Vision 2030, which is we want to be an upper middle income economy by year 2030. That's the vision he has been championing. And there are 14 pillars under that strategy. Some in the bank are aware of what it looks like, but let me go into too much detail. And now ask His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, Idi Mnangagwa, to make his remarks. Over to you, sir.
May you be seated. Our Director of Ceremonies, our high-level facilitator, former President of the Republic of Mozambique, my dear brother, His Excellency Joaquim Chissano, our champion, President of the African Development Bank Group, Dr. Adesina. Now my sister, may I recognize my young sister, Kapwepwe, Executive Secretary of COMESA. Executive Directors of the African Development Bank, other distinguished delegates in here, senior government officials who are here, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Dr. Adesina, our champion of the African Development Bank, for hosting us at this roundtable meeting, which gives us an opportunity to appraise your executive directors and invited guests on the Zimbabwe's arrears clearance and the debt resolution process. Allow me, from the onset, to reiterate that the government of Zimbabwe stands committed to resolve its long overdue debt arrears and re-engagement with development partners and creditors. Forums such as this one are indeed beneficial as we seek to reposition our economy for sustained growth anchored by partnerships and multilateral financial support. Since 2018, my government has been implementing key reforms to achieve macroeconomic stability and sustainable, inclusive economic development. And these include economic growth and stability reforms. The reforms have seen us implementing fiscal consolidation, removal of subsidies, enhancing domestic revenue mobilization, elimination of quasi-fiscal operations, limiting expenditures to available financial resources, and containment of money supply growth and introduction of a willing buyer, willing seller foreign exchange rate system. Then the second pillar is the governance reforms. Laws have been repealed or realigned with our 2013 National Constitution. Good governance, the rule of law, transparency, and accountability continue to be entrenched. We are strengthening institutions that support our democracy to ensure their effectiveness and efficiency in the execution of their mandates. Our judiciary is impartial, in line with the separation of powers, and maintains its independence. In our determination to guarantee access to justice for our people, numerous interventions have been made, including the construction of courts in previously marginalized communities throughout our motherland, Zimbabwe. We are relentless in our efforts to combat corruption in both the public and private sectors. No one is above the law. Meanwhile, unity and peace-building initiatives are being promoted towards enhancing tolerance and inclusive dialogue among our citizenry. On the land tenure reforms, compensation of former farm owners, and the resolution of the BIPA's pillar. In 2020, government signed a global compensation deed with former farm owners for US $3.5 billion. This is aimed at the compensation for farm improvements on farms acquired under the Land Reform Program, compensation for acquired farms protected under bilateral protection and promotion agreements, BIPAs, is being considered on a case-by-case basis. Third pillar, the prudent public debt management. My administration has accelerated the implementation of the arrears clearance, debt relief, and restructuring strategy. The promotion of transparency and accountability through regular reporting, as well as the publication of public data statistics and information, is ongoing. Over and above these reforms aimed at macroeconomic stability, the government of Zimbabwe has taken steps to modernize, industrialize, and create jobs towards lifting more of our people out of poverty and prosperity. Additionally, several transformative infrastructure projects are being completed and commissioned. This is creating a strong foundation for sustained inclusive growth and development while enhancing competitiveness of the economy. With regard to the transport sector, critical economic enablers are being modernized and new ones constructed. The upgrading and rehabilitation of the road network is ongoing. The completion of the strategic Harare-Masvingo Bight Bridge Highway and the modernization of the Bight Bridge border post is set to improve efficiencies along our SADC region's north-south corridor, more so in the context of regional integration and trade under the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. In the aviation and tourism sector, the modernization of the Robert Mugabe International Airport, along with other airports across the country, have been completed, setting the tone for a transformation of Zimbabwe's aviation, tourism, and hospitality sectors. Tourism sector, a major beneficiary of the infrastructure rehabilitation thrust and the engagement, the re-engagement policy, has rebounded to pre-COVID-19 pandemic levels. Investments to increase accommodation stock at our major resorts has also increased, but as my Minister of Finance has said, in Victoria Falls, we don't have adequate, we've promoted tourism, and we don't have adequate accommodation. I'm sure Zambia is very happy, because then they cross and they sleep in Zambia and come back. Oh, my sister, yeah, it's true. They sleep across in Zambia and come back next day. Present licensees have the potential to generate close to 2,000 megawatts. More support for renewable energy projects, energy efficiency measures, and sustainable agriculture and forestry practices are equally key to our modernization of the economy. Dams and irrigation. The construction of dams are underway across our country's provinces, including Gwai Shangani Lake, first conceptualized in 1912, but it has only been realized now under the Second Republic. This Gwai Shangani Lake will end Bulawayo's water challenges, revitalize the city's manufacturing potential, and create an agricultural green belt in the surrounding provinces as the water is carried to Bulawayo. Irrigation infrastructure development continues to be accelerated with focus on water conveyancing to climate-proof our agriculture sector, ensure food security, as well as guarantee the water and sanitation needs of our communities across the country. In agriculture, I'm pleased to highlight that Zimbabwe is now food secure. We are self-sufficient in wheat production since 2022, saving up to $300 million annually in import costs. I have no doubt that looking at the figures this winter season, we may have surplus to sell with wheat. A maize bumper harvest attributed to favorable rainfall, increased irrigation capacity, and agronomy support agronomy support by government programs is now a thorn. It's now the norm in our agricultural sector. But you want to understand this one. Fumvudza is a Shona name. Fumvudza and Entwasa is in the Rele. Climate-proofed agriculture. This means a particular model of agriculture which guarantees food security at the household level, focusing on the efficient use of inputs, labor, and water resources among small-scale and communal farmers has had tremendous results to household food security, nutrition, and incomes. Increased grain inflows from communal small-scale and large commercial farmers has resulted in the growth of our strategic national grain reserves in the country. In the mining sector, Zimbabwe aims to attain 12 billion, in fact we have reached it, US dollars mining industry by end of year. Currently, construction is underway of what will be one of Africa's largest integrated steel plant, the Manize steel plant. The expected annual capacity of over 1.2 million tons of steel will entail benefits accruing to downstream iron and steel industries, including SMEs, not just in Zimbabwe, but the SADC region and the continent at large. Our country is one of the world's largest lithium deposits. This mining subsector will leapfrog the growth of Zimbabwe's mining sector, including growth in foreign exchange earnings by the sector. Platinum mining remains a critical player in Zimbabwe's economy. Expansion and upgrades to existing operations with the attendant requirement for local-based value addition is positioning the country as a competitive global platinum producer. In the health sector, Zimbabwe is on course to achieve universal health coverage. The construction and equipping of additional health centers, as well as district hospitals through both government funding and the private-public partnerships will undoubtedly address health care access and affordability to the most vulnerable members of our society in all our communities. In education, construction and upgrading of schools through devolution funds, we give 5% of revenue collection to this sector to improve access to quality, inclusive education in the country. Focus is currently on an education system that is biased towards science, technology, and innovation for the production of goods and services essential for our economy and the needs of our own people. To date, the country is yielding immense benefits from the new policy thrust. These massive infrastructure development projects underway in the country are having a transformational impact on the economy and day-to-day lives of the people of Zimbabwe. More can be done with increased partnerships and support. Ladies and gentlemen, in December 2021, government adopted the Arrears clearance, debt relief and restructuring strategy to help resolve the country's long outstanding debt overhang, which is weighing heavily on our development agenda. To operationalize this strategy, I was pleased that my dear brother, young brother of course, the president of the African Development Bank Group, Dr. Adesina, accepted to be the champion of our arrears clearance and the debt resolution process. My colleague and elder brother, the former president of Mozambique, His Excellency Comrade Joaquim Chissano, is a high-level facilitator of the dialogue process between the government of Zimbabwe and its international creditors. In this regard, in December 2022, we established a structured dialogue platform. The dialogue process is designed to institutionalize constructive engagement with all our creditors and development partners. The agreed pillars for this process and implementation are as follows: economic reforms, governance and reforms, land tenure reforms, compensation of former farm owners, and the resolution of bilateral investment protection and promotion agreements, BIPAs. These reforms are discussed in technical meetings, which incorporate representatives from government, international creditors, development partners, represented by their ambassadors, the private sector, and the civil society organizations. Through this dialogue, the government of Zimbabwe has managed to successfully institutionalize regular, constructive, open dialogue, build trust and confidence among all the stakeholders. To this end, policy reform matrices have been developed, outlining policy actions and indicators to measure performance over time. These reforms will underpin the ongoing arrears clearance and debt resolution process. My government is fully committed to their implementation. So far, there is emerging consensus and a growing confidence in the process, which is promoted by a transparent and inclusive consultations. Sadly, however, the lack of access to external concessional financing to fund Zimbabwe's national priority projects and programs remains a drawback. We are therefore in need of funding to support the productive economy as well as cushion vulnerable sectors such as education, health, food security, and climate change. In this regard, we invite development partners and international financial institutions to scale up support for this comprehensive arrears clearance and debt resolution process. Meanwhile, guided by our re-engagement agenda, my government is committed to honoring its debt obligations. To date, we have been making quarterly token payments. My Minister of Finance said token payments, and they meant token payments to the multilateral development banks and our Paris Club creditors. We commend our development partners and the creditor countries for their patience, open and constructive dialogue, and for speaking with Zimbabwe on Zimbabwean issues. Distinguished participants, the technical and structured dialogue meetings will continue as a platform for inclusive, frank, and constructive dialogue, monitoring progress on the implementation of reforms by the government, technical level exchange of information, and channeling of technical support to the process from development partners. Allow me to express my gratitude to our champion, my young brother, President Adesina of the bank, African Development Bank, and our high-level facilitator, my dear brother, His Excellency, former President of the Republic of Mozambique, Comrade Chisano, for engaging the administration of the United States of America in May 2023, which is this month, for deeper bilateral engagements on behalf of the government of people of Zimbabwe. It was not unheard of the last 23 years. The bilateral engagements are key in addressing specific issues relating to our historical relations with some of our creditors. Our development partners and creditors have shown support and commitment to the arrears clearance and debt resolution process. This process is supported with financial resources from the African Development Bank Group And we are thankful for your unwavering support. We equally thank our high-level facilitator, former President Chisano, and his advisory team for their technical support to this process. Going forward, the Arrears Clearance and Debt Resolution Roadmap entails the following: negotiating for a staff monitoring program with the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, continuation of dialogue through structured dialogue platform meetings, conducting of free and fair elections this year in August, implementation of the staff monitored program reforms, resource mobilization of a wet SMP, and mobilization of bridging finance to clear areas with international financial institutions. As I conclude, ladies and gentlemen, I want to highlight Zimbabwe will be holding the 2023 harmonized general elections in August. I therefore want to assure you all that my government has put in place the requisite mechanisms to guarantee peaceful, free, fair, transparent, and credible elections as our country further entrenches democracy and constitutionalism. International observers are welcome, and they will be invited through the relevant channels at the appropriate time, which is very close, in accordance with our laws. We look forward to strengthening partnerships and playing our part within the Committee of Nations towards addressing the various challenges facing the world today. Zimbabwe is a friend to all and an enemy to none. I thank you.
Thank you, Excellency, for your opening remarks and guidance note, which is very clear and I think shapes the conversation that we're having, the important conversation rather, that we're having today. I've also been reminded to take note that we have the AU representative in the room. We would like to also recognize him, Ambassador Albert Muchanga, the Commissioner for Economic Development, Trade and Tourism and Industry and Minerals for the African Union. We recognize you, sir. At this juncture, ladies and gentlemen, if you allow me to invite His Excellency, Comrade Joaquim Chissano, former President of the Republic of Mozambique, and our high-level facilitator for the Zimbabwe debt arrears clearance process, to give us his address.
Your Excellency, Dr. Emerson Dambuzu Mnangagwa, President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, His Excellency Dr. Akinwumi Yodeji Adeshina, President of the African Development Bank, Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, Governors, and Executive Directors of the African Development Bank, senior government officials, distinguished representatives of partner governments and institutions, Excellencies, members of the diplomatic corps, distinguished guests, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor and privilege for me to be here today in Sharm el-Sheikh, attending the side event on Zimbabwe on the margins of the 54th annual meeting of the African Development Bank. Allow me at the outset to express my sincere appreciation to the government of the Arab Republic of Egypt for the warm hospitality extended to me and my entourage since our arrival in Cairo and Sharm el-Sheikh. I wish to register my sincere appreciations to His Excellency Dr. Akiyumi Adesina, President of the African Development Bank, for his kind invitation to participate in this meeting and for the opportunity to address this August gathering. It's my appreciation that this auspicious meeting will be crowned by a successful outcome, one that will contribute decisively for Zimbabwe arrears clearance and debt resolution process. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in December 2022, the government of Zimbabwe decided to launch a structured dialogue platform for arrears clearance and debt resolution process. This decision was taken after 21 years of bruising sanctions that had devastating social and economic consequences on Zimbabwe, resulting in high levels of poverty, huge unemployment, macroeconomic instability, and debt distress. The staggering debt, of which 80% are arrears, has become a formidable impediment for the country's efforts to social and economic development, including achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. The dialogue was structured around three reform pillars, notably economic reforms, second, governance reforms, and the third one being about land tenure, compensation of former farm owners, and resolution of farms under bilateral investment promotion and protection agreements, BIPAs. In this dialogue, all stakeholders have been participating, including the government of Zimbabwe, development partners, private sector, and civil society. To help in the stewardship of the dialogue, the government of Zimbabwe invited Dr. Adesina to be the champion of Zimbabwe arrears clearance and debt resolution process, and myself to be the high-level facilitator of the structured dialogue platform of the said process. I have accepted the task of leading the facilitation of the structured dialogue platform on arrears clearance and debt resolution process because Zimbabwe is so dear to me. Besides being... Yes, you are clapping hands, but I thought that you were going to say, why it's so dear? Yes, it's a long story. Since 1960, we, the people of Mozambique, have been together with the people of Zimbabwe to fight against tyranny, against oppression, against dictatorship, therefore to fight for democracy. We were all along together. Zimbabweans with arms crossed our country from Zambia. And our people were carrying their ammunition, our women in their heads, across our territory. When we won independence, Zimbabweans came as refugees to our country. And they continued the struggle. We got involved in this struggle, directly and indirectly. It took years. In 1980, we created the SADC, invited the liberation movements to participate in that creation of SADC, because we knew that Zimbabwe was going to become independent from Ian Smith's regime. And together, we mobilized the whole world to support us. It was for the sake of Zimbabwe, and Zimbabwe became a focal point in Southern Africa, particularly after achieving its independence in 1980. And we continued working together to develop SADC, to decrease the dependency of the countries in that area from apartheid influence and dependency on apartheid. And Zimbabwe was a focal country. I wanted to spare you of this explanation because I know that it would not be exhaustive, but your applauses. So I was saying that Zimbabwe is so dear to me. Besides being a very important country that lies at the heart of SADC and the Southern Africa region, with a remarkable geographical position and richly endowed by mineral resources, besides its outstanding agricultural and agribusiness potential, its talented, educated, and hard-working citizens, Zimbabwe possesses all the necessary natural and strategic conditions to become a successful country and a regional powerhouse, capable of exerting a positive influence in the development of Southern Africa. This speech here we heard from the President speaks by itself. Indeed, a feeble Zimbabwe is impeding the region and the continent as a whole the opportunity of developing in a harmonious manner, as many regional infrastructure development projects, including roads, railways, and power transmission lines, have been brought to a standstill as they must run through the country. The continental free trade is also undermined by the situation prevailing in Zimbabwe. Therefore, bringing Zimbabwe back to the concert of nations is of critical importance, and we commend the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe for his visionary leadership in seeking re-engagement with the international community. And I tell everybody that I'm an optimist, but each speech I deliver on this matter, I become even more optimistic. When the President was talking here, he reminded me of a say which we have in my language, Shangan, which reads as such: "Anchumu ni nchumu, ulava nchumu, lukunga ma nchumu, ngata kuma nchumu." I think that you understood. It means each thing, the thing and thing, it means each thing requires in order to be, requires a thing. If you don't do a thing, you will get nothing. The people of Zimbabwe, the government of Zimbabwe, and President Mnangagwa, they are doing their thing. So that's why I accepted to give a thing to them and to call for all of us to give a thing. You hear me praising Zimbabwe, but I'm a facilitator. Don't think that I'm going just to say, hurrah, Zimbabwe, and stop there. No. I will continue to urge them to continue doing more things so that they get something from this international community. But at the same time, I will continue to plead with the international community to have a better understanding of all these efforts, and as I said, which are very much necessary to the whole region, and therefore they should also to deliver a thing. The inclusive dialogue process has produced outstanding results. The first major achievement is the dialogue itself. The process provided an opportunity for a constructive and open dialogue on a wide range of issues that are critical for Zimbabwe's re-engagement with an effective participation of stakeholders. As a result of the very positive environment in which dialogue has been taking place, the stakeholders engaged with the necessary goodwill and were able to rebuild increasing levels of trust, as well as arrive at a consensus on a reform package. This should be celebrated. The second major achievement is that the government of Zimbabwe undertook to implement a set of reforms covering economic governance, land tenure, and compensation of former farm owners and resolution of BIPAS issues. Regarding economic reforms, the government of Zimbabwe has committed itself to establishing a market-set exchange rate, ending the quasi-fiscal activities by the central bank, enhancing domestic revenue collection, undertaking macroeconomic reforms, and negotiating with the IMF a staff monitored program, SMP, to anchor the reforms. The governance reforms are focused in 6 key areas, drawn from Zimbabwe's National Development Strategy 1, notably enhanced justice delivery, public sector transparency and accountability, combating corruption, promotion of human rights, electoral reforms, and national unity, peace, and security, to measure performance on implementation of commitments made in these areas. 3 international recognized standards were identified as suitable yardsticks, namely the Mo Ibrahim Index, the Rule of Law Index, and the Corruption Perception Index. Reforms under land tenure, compensation of former farm owners and of farms under BIPAS include the finalization of a new 99-year lease that is tradable and bankable, compensation of former farm owners under the Global Compensation Deed, as well as a resolution of farms under BIPAS. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as the dialogue is pursued further, the government must simultaneously embark in a process of implementation of the commitments made. This is a process that requires determination by the government to fulfill, implement its agenda. We recognize that the process of dialogue is government-led and owned. We also recognize that the reforms envisaged in the matrices are the sole responsibility of the government of Zimbabwe. The government is already implementing the tough commitments it undertook. This progress must also be commended. However, we should also recognize that the government alone will not be able to implement all the commitments it undertook, simply because it doesn't have the resources to do so. In this regard, international partners should consider providing assistance for the government to implement those commitments. Therefore, we would like to appeal to the creditors and development partners of Zimbabwe to first reaffirm their support to the dialogue process and reform agenda. So far, we have got good responses in this respect. So to provide support or repackage current resources committed to Zimbabwe in order to support a wet SMP so that a financial cushion is assured for critical social programs for vulnerable people, such as food security, education, health, climate change adaptation, and social protection. 3, support the government of Zimbabwe in their resource mobilization strategies for compensation of former farm owners under the Global Compensation Deed and resolution of farms under BIPAS without adding more debt to the country. Help in the reconstructing of a bridge finance to Zimbabwe for arrears clearance and debt resolution. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we are aware that the way the forthcoming general elections in Zimbabwe will be conducted will mark a turning point on how the process of arrears clearance and debt resolution will unfold. In statements made throughout the process, His Excellency President of Zimbabwe has repeatedly stated that the country would conduct democratic, free, fair, and peaceful elections, and he repeated it today. We are encouraged by these statements, and as the country moves towards elections, we would like to encourage all Zimbabweans to conduct themselves in an orderly manner during the electoral process. They should stay away from violence. They should not allow themselves to be manipulated by anyone to engage in violence or any illegal conduct. Conduct or acts that may undermine the electoral process. They must remain vigilant and participate in a process that should be peaceful, free, and fair. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate that productive dialogue remains the only path to Zimbabwe's re-engagement, as well as to arrears clearance and debt resolution, and it should be a permanent feature in Zimbabwe political activity. This dialogue is also fundamental for the settlement of debt, for rebuilding mutual trust and confidence between all stakeholders, but also for improving relations with development partners. This unique opportunity should not be missed. In this regard, the dialogue must continue and produce measurable commitments to consolidate the gains made so far. Zimbabwe must firmly regain its position in SADC and power the development of Southern Africa, besides improving the living standards of its people. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Dr. Gisano, for being part of this thing and asking us to all put something into the process. So a very strong message from our high-level facilitator, Dr. Gisano. May I, ladies and gentlemen, call upon our champion for this thing, Dr. Adeshina, to give us his presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Your Excellency, President Mnangagwa, President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, and my big brother, Your Excellency, former President Gisano, as you can say, he's a very, very wise man, and from this thing to that thing and so on, he and I travel a lot. It's very good to see you, sir, and I pray and hope that when I'm your age, I'll be able to still be like that. You're a great leader. Thank you very much, sir. Honorable Minister of Finance, my dear brother, Professor Mutuli, Nkube, I think when people see me, they said, I am very driven, energetic, and so on. But when it comes to this thing, this professor, Minister of Finance, is very, very dynamic. He's been very, very focused. He appears to have a renewable energy to get arrears clearance done. So thank you very much, my governor as well. Honorable ministers and from Zimbabwe, we were there just about almost, I guess, over a week, almost 10 days ago. It's nice to see you, Justice Minister, and everybody else. Thank you very much. I see the DG of Budget, Mr. Andrew Mvumbe, who used to be an executive director, actually, at the African Development Bank. It's nice to see you. And the executive secretaries that are here, the executive secretary of SADC, the executive secretary, Madam Secretary of COMESA, and my brother, Professor Muchanga of the EU. I see, sorry, I think I'm missing. Sorry? Huh? Yes, yes, you're recognized. Sorry, I don't have notes here with me, so I might miss people. The minister from South Africa, and I see our friends from U.S. Treasury. I was just there. Eric, it was nice to see you. I see several other friends from Treasury and other partners and creditors of Zimbabwe that are here. I see governors of the bank that are here. Thank you very much for being here. Our executive directors, my executive directors of the bank, thank you for being here. Senior management and staff of the bank, of course, the creditors. And when I look at this room, I got encouraged. I get encouraged because I have a sense of hope. Because your filling this room today tells me you're here for a reason. You're here because not because you want to hear just about Zimbabwe. It's because you yourself are concerned about Zimbabwe. And you want to know what's going on and how you can support and help the efforts that are on the way. So I don't take it for granted at all that you've all taken time to be here and I want to thank you very much. Let me thank His Excellency, President Mnangagwa. You had him. You hear his heart, you hear his hope, you hear his vision, you hear his commitment, and you hear how resolute he is to get Zimbabwe back on track. And when we were in Zimbabwe to see him, he had just gone to see, I guess you went to a church, it was a church service of somebody who turned, I think, 100 or so, Mr. President. Huh? And normally you would leave the president alone, but he said he wanted to see myself and His Excellency President Chisano. And so we said, yeah, we'll talk to you. I'm your champion. President Chisano is your facilitator. 15 minutes with the president will be fine enough for us. 30 minutes will be quite generous of the president. He met us for 2.5 hours. And he met us not on a Monday, not on a Tuesday, he met us on a Sunday night when he should be resting. That's because this president, from all I know, all I see, and all of my engagement, is very, very committed to making sure that we can turn this situation around and give Zimbabwe a new hope and a new direction. And we are also meeting here, interestingly, in Sharm el-Sheikh, which is a place of peace. You know, sometimes the mouth, I don't know if you're like me, sometimes I like, my favorite hamburger is when I eat it, my tongue sometimes, I bite it. Looks like some of you have had that experience. So what I'm saying is that sometimes even the mouth, the teeth and the tongue, sometimes they collide. But you're not going to cut your tongue off, right? And you're not going to take your teeth out. Just have to adjust and make sure there can be harmony. And I think that's what we are doing today, trying to get that harmony between everybody so that Zimbabwe can be fully back. Zimbabwe deserves a new and better and prosperous future. And I'm sure that that's why we all are here today. I lived in Zimbabwe. I wasn't 17 years old, Mr. President. And when I lived in Zimbabwe and worked there, I was then in Rockefeller Foundation in New York. I was in charge of Southern Africa region. Zimbabwe was bustling. Great economic activity, critical for the Southern Africa development region. Jobs, first-class hospitals. University of Zimbabwe was world-class. Everybody was getting trained there. Zimbabwe was like a little Switzerland. Of course, we all know the history of what happened, so I'm not going to go back into that. But it's unfortunate that that happened, and this once very prosperous nation went tumbling down. And of course, sanctions were put on Zimbabwe. I have gone around as champion of Zimbabwe to United States. I've met with different people. I do not sense any animosity towards Zimbabwe. I sense that people recognize that what is in the past happened in the past. But you see, to make history, you have to address history. And so, in addressing history, some of the challenges we just have to realize are as follows. I looked at the same Zimbabwe. They owe the debt, it's about $17.5 billion to bilateral and multilateral creditors. The sanctions have had devastating effects on Zimbabwe. If you look at it, you see poverty levels very high, more than 44%. Unemployment very high among the young people. Zimbabwe used to have the rolling stock of the railways of Zimbabwe. Used to be about almost 12.5 million metric tons. Today is just about a little over 2 million metric tons that you have. Zimbabwe lost well over 102, almost 105 correspondent banks. So they can't trade, they can't do anything. You also have a situation that has affected the rest of SADC region because Zimbabwe is just so centrally located. And so SACU receipts, transport, rail, infrastructure, energy, everything that's needed for SADC to be booming. Just because Zimbabwe, it's not what it used to be. It's not just Zimbabwe and Zimbabwe that are suffering. The rest of Southern Africa development community is suffering weighed down by that. And I look at the young people of Zimbabwe. Those that are young today were not even born at that time. And so you have a situation where the sanctions is compromising their future. And they were not even there when all of this happened. And so all of that just to say that it is time to put the past behind us. It's time to discuss about real issues, heal the wounds of the past, and make a new pathway into the future. And so when I got a call from His Excellency President Mnangagwa asking whether I could, in his own decision, support his decision to re-engage, his decision to see how we can clear the arrears. You know, I like to sing, but I'm not singing tonight. But I still like that song. You know, it says, I can see clearly now, right? When the clouds are gone. But if you have clouds, you can't see clearly. So, but hopefully when this is done, Mr. President, with support of our creditors, I promise I'll sing you that song. When Mr. President called me for this, and my governors are here, my EDs, executive directors are here, my staff are here, why did I say yes? I said yes because I lived in Zimbabwe, I know Zimbabwe. I said yes because Zimbabwe is the only country of all the 81 member countries of the African Development Bank that is under sanctions. I said yes because when one part of a body hurts, the entire system hurts. I said yes because it's very important for us to lift SADC up, and we cannot lift SADC up without Zimbabwe. And I said yes because the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is Africa's biggest opportunity today. And we can't do that without a new and resurgent Zimbabwe. And of course, I said yes because I love Zimbabwe. I love the people of Zimbabwe. And I want, as president of the bank, to be able to create us collectively a new prosperous future for those young people who were not even there when all of this happened. Mr. President, thank you very much for asking me to play this role and to ask His Excellency President Chisano, who is retired, to come out of retirement. Just think of that. And why did he do that, President Chisano? Because, you know, we have a saying, a proverb in my language. It says, elders cannot be in an open market and watch the heads of the babies on the mother's back slump. That's why he came out of retirement, to join a young person like me running around cities and stuff like that, just for Zimbabwe. May God bless you, sir. The dialogue process. Before I say that, I just need to be clear what we do, myself and the president. We are interlocutors. We engage, we hear, we listen, we understand, we transmit things between one group to the other, making sure that they can have common understanding. And the president has given us an unfettered access to him at all times. And so we are honest brokers. And it's not always easy, some of the issues that you'll have to deal with, but all I know is that this structured dialogue process is the best thing to happen to Zimbabwe. And I will explain. We used to have what we call the Friends of Zimbabwe. Eric, you remember we would meet at the margins of the World Bank, IMF annual meetings, and we'd talk about Zimbabwe. But that's really what we were doing, talk about Zimbabwe. But the Zimbabweans were not there. We're not talking with the Zimbabweans, we were just talking about Zimbabwe. What makes this structured dialogue very different is that we are walking with Zimbabwe. We are walking with Zimbabwe. We are speaking together with Zimbabwe. The president is involved. All the ministers, look at the delegation of ministers that are here. It's an all-cabinet effort that are involved. The concerned parties are involved. The commercial farmers are involved. The civil society is involved. The private sector, we've had meetings with them. They are involved. This is a very inclusive process for everybody talking together. And there is no issue that cannot be put on the table. So this is the best opportunity that Zimbabwe has and that the global community has to talk to each other and find a solution to the impasse that has actually hampered Zimbabwe's economic growth and development. Now, I wanted to say the African Development Bank is strongly committed to this process, and why? This bank, with your support as shareholders, because we can't do anything without you as shareholders, have supported us to clear arrears twice for other countries. You supported us for Somalia, arrears clearance. You supported us for Sudan, arrears clearance. Zimbabwe's arrears clearance is the one that we're looking for. And I understand the contexts are very, very different because of the history and all of the challenges and so on. But what's important is that we've done it before. And therefore we can do it again. As long as particular conditions that are set are understood, internalized, and decisions are based on not emotion or not even love, but based on delivery on concrete actions. So that's why the African Development Bank decided to get involved, and I want my staff, Muno, to please rise. I don't know how she's managed to. She's the country manager in Zimbabwe. Mr. President, when you called me, and I called her, she almost fainted. I said, Muno, we're going to do discussions on arrears clearance. The phone went dead. I said, are you there? She said, I'm there, sir. Well, you've done a fantastic job. Thank you. And so we provided $4.1 million, and also Lela Mukadem, the DG from Southern Africa, and Vice President Marilo Aking. Ah, yes, okay. So clearly when women are in charge, it looks like things happen. So thank you very much for all of your great work. So we provided $4.1 million towards this arrears process, and we committed to working with everybody. I visited Zimbabwe with President Chisano. We met with all the development partners who represent all the creditor countries. There were tough discussions, and they should be tough discussions, because there are very tough issues on the table. But the best way to progress on any matter is dialogue. Dialogue, understand differences, make sure that we are closing the divergences until we have come to a place in which, okay, all right, the divergences we've narrowed it enough that we can go forward. And so we've done that, and we continue to do that. And you've heard from the president about that. I'll just say the Minister of Finance didn't go into all the details. I tell you, he can give you, I'm proud of this guy, honestly, the amount of work that they are doing. But if I might just help him to explain it, as President Chisano said, 3 working groups we have: Economic Working Group, the Governance Working Group, and Minister of Justice, the Land and Compensation Working Group. In fact, the last working group was not even part of the conversation. I mean, it was part of the conversation, but there was no platform for the concerned farmers to be there. And I remember it was the minister of, the ambassador of, was it Netherlands? Netherlands, who raised it at our second meeting and said, well, why don't we create a platform that the concerned farmers can be there? And I said, yes. And the bank, again, committed to that, and that's why we have this particular working group. And so sometimes when we go around and people say, well, is Zimbabwe really serious? Does Zimbabwe really understand the gravity of the reforms that it's been asked to do? Is the president of Zimbabwe really committed? How much committed can a president be? I spoke with him just about 10 days ago. I said, Mr. President, I want us to have a dialogue with our shareholders right here. He told me, I will be in Sharm el-Sheikh, and here he is. Thank you, sir. Great commitment. So these areas on economic reforms, the Minister of Finance, that working group is chaired by the World Bank and IMF. Carlos, who is that's his name, right? Carlos. Yeah. The IMF country director. And by the way, one of my executive directors used to be a country director in Zimbabwe. You may stand, Faniza, so that they can see you. You can't hide. Yes, okay. So we have people that know Zimbabwe here that have worked also in Zimbabwe. But on the economic reforms, there are 3 fundamental issues. One is the quasi-fiscal policies of the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. There is the issue of the exchange rate, multiple exchange rates. There's the issue of the reforms of the state, the removal of subsidies, and also reform of state-owned enterprises. And there's the issue of taking some of those debt that are actually hanging on the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, transferring everything to the ministry. What do you call it? Some kind of committee? What is the committee on macro and fiscal? That's what it is. Yes, yeah. They set up a committee to harmonize the fiscal and the macro policy. They've done a great job. In fact, when I talked to IMF told me in Zimbabwe that the Article 4 mission to Zimbabwe that was in December was a great success, right? Is somebody from IMF here? Oh, okay, all right, well, good, all right. And the board looked at it in March, I understand, and that it was approved. So they are doing the right things in terms of macroeconomic and fiscal policy reforms that are necessary. And I know this is not going to be easy. You, our shareholders, gave us funds for the Zimbabwe's Zim Trust Fund. And that Zim Trust Fund, even though Zimbabwe had no resources, we used it to support energy and water that benefited more than 6 million people. But these reforms that we're talking about are hard reforms. They're going to have impact on people. And so we've got to figure out how to cushion the impact on the population, even though the determination is there. My late father, when I was much younger, when I was naughty, and I was always naughty quite a lot of times anyway, he would take his, kind of smack me, and after smacking me, then he holds me again. He said, "Does it hurt?" And that just took the pain away. What I'm saying is that we have to accompany Zimbabwe. I used to be a kid I used to get malaria all the time as a kid. Eric, were you a Peace Corps? No. But anybody know anything about Camel Queen, Niva Queen? Huh? I can see some faces. Oh, man. A very bitter stuff. So every time my mother would take me to the hospital and they would give me Niva Queen, I would throw up all the time. And so my mother thought she would find a better way of dealing with this. So she gave me Eba. You know, the Eba is like sadza, but it's very soft, what do you call it, like, It's maize out of maize. And, yeah, like, no, it's not porridge, it's hard stuff, but you can swallow it. We call it swallow, something you can swallow. And my mother will prepare okra soup, which is very slimy. And she will put the Neva Queen inside of the bolus. She will put it in the okra soup, and she said, take it. And of course, I swallowed it, and it went straight down. I never felt anything about the Neva Queen. What I'm saying is that help Zimbabwe to be able to swallow the tough reforms. They can't take Neva Queen straight. They can't take Camo Queen straight. Put some okra there. They need a wet staff monitor program. The second part of it, of course, is the governance reforms. The Minister of Justice, you can stand, Minister of Justice and Parliamentary Affairs. He has worked very, very hard. They came up with all these matrices, and President Chisano was talking about it. Judicial reforms, public sector institution reforms, the whole issue around electoral reforms, corruption issues, free and fair elections, and several other issues, as you have heard. These are the things we discuss with the partners. And the development partners of Zimbabwe are the ones that chose the indicators, some sub-indicators, I think, right? How many? 16 sub-indicators of measuring the outcome of this were actually suggested by the development partners. That tells you how inclusive this process is. And they picked the hardest thing, which is using the Mo Ibrahim Index. And so all I'm just trying to say is that this is not just something Zimbabwe is doing by itself. It's something that all the development partners are involved with. But we have been very clear with His Excellency the President, because we went, President Chisano and I, to the United States, to State Department, to Treasury Department, to USAID. We met with Congress and so on. Why? Because of ZIDERA, the Zimbabwe Democracy and Economic Recovery Act, which is an act of Congress that's actually led to many of the sanctions. So, but the key there is good, free and fair elections, to have good democratic space, freedom of speech, freedom of association, and of course, good governance over land reforms. Those are the ZIDERA conditions, and the President is committed, the ministers are committed to making sure that we can make progress on ZIDERA, and hopefully it can then lead to the discussion on how to lift the sanctions. The last thing I want to say is just to explain the issue of compensation of the farmers. Please bear with me, because sometimes I get a bit emotional on this issue. I was in Zimbabwe at that time when things were going wrong, and I remember making the suggestion to the farmers that were affected that why can't you tax the tobacco crop, because tobacco was the main export of Zimbabwe. Why don't you tax the tobacco crop? Why don't you create a fund and use that fund to buy land from yourself and pay yourself for the improvement on the capitalized value of the land? Because that's where the debate was. And then you hand over land. Yes, a socially distributive policy of government, you can. But of course, unfortunately, that wasn't done, and here we are. So we can't make the same mistake twice. And that's why we have said that it's important that the commercial farmers be compensated. And I want to thank His Excellency the President for making that decision, and also the Minister of Finance for implementing that decision, the Minister of Justice for making sure these things will be done. And the Minister of Finance has committed to $3.5 billion. Well, here's the problem. They can't pay $3.5 billion. They've only been able to do what, $1 million? How much? $1 million. Yes. But they need more resources. But they're under sanctions. So how are they going to get the resources from? And that's why we suggested to them that we need to look for new ways of front-loading the financing structure that will allow them to front-load the payments of the commercial farmers. And we are discussing that with them. The president, I discussed with the president agreed, the Minister of Finance agreed, and we are working with them on this. And the point I'm trying to say is this. If you are bowling in a bowling aisle, there is always a central pin in the middle. If you hit that central pin, maybe you have a chance. But if you don't, you go in the gutter all the time. If we do not resolve paying back and compensating the commercial farmers, we will be in the gutters all the time. And that's why, Mr. President, I want to thank you very much for your bold decision to ensure that this will be done. With support of our shareholders, I'm taking time to explain it from my heart what these issues are. With your support, we should be able to have that structure work so we can get this thing done once and for all. And finally, I hear people tell me, are you sure that there's commitment to giving land back? I mean, the deeds of land back. Yes, I am. Minister of Justice, 99-year leases, right? The issue is how do you make those leases bankable, transferable, right? And they have already agreed to make those things happen. So all I'm trying to say is this. We are not there yet completely, but a lot of progress is being made. There's very strong commitment. And certainly myself, I feel honored with President Chisano to be part of this process. And I want to thank all the partners, all the creditors, for being open in this discussion. I pray that we'll see a light at the end of the tunnel, and that light becomes a light, in fact, that will usher in, once we resolve all of this, a new Zimbabwe. And the president has said the most important thing today. He said, I will ensure that there is a free and fair election, because everything we are doing depends on that. If there is no free and fair election, if there's violence and all of that, and that's why I want to join President Chisano in urging for there to be a peaceful, calm, transparent, inclusive election, as the president has said. And with your help, and by God's grace, the head of the baby will not slump on its back. It will be a new beginning for Zimbabwe by God's grace. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Adesina, for such a powerful presentation. You spoke like a true champion, and we thank you for the role that you're playing. If I may, at this point in time, call upon one of our governors for the bank, Honorable Godogwana, Minister of Finance for the Republic of South Africa, to give us his reaction and interventions.
Thank you, Program Director. The President of Zimbabwe, Dr. Mnangagwa, the former President of Mozambique, Dr. Chisano, the President of the African Development Bank, Dr. Adesina. It's a string of doctors. Let me combine everybody under the generic term of excellencies and distinguished guests. My culture, both traditional and politically, does not allow me to speak after my elders. There was something wrong with protocol, so it has made me weaker and not say much. But let me say one thing. I've come to send up a message, but before I do that, let me capture our relationship with Zimbabwe and the whole of SADC. Our relationship is cultural, economic, and political. Cultural, economic, and political. You'll be surprised that President Chisano, our deputy president of the country, belonged to the same group as President Chisano from Mozambique. There's a cultural relationship between ourselves and Zimbabwe. Cultural relationship between ourselves and and Botswana. You can go on. Politically, we had our headquarters in Zambia. So it's that relationship that exists between these countries. Even politically, before the dawn of democracy in South Africa, there has been this interchange. The majority of people in Southern Africa worked in the gold mines in South Africa. Our famous singer, Hugh Masekela, captured this thing in a song saying, "Stimela sibheke Zimbabwe," characterizing this migration, sisuke Zimbabwe, characterizing this migration of workers from across the region to work in the gold mines in South Africa. That has been that integrated way in which our relationship have existed. You'll imagine then even any challenge that faces Zimbabwe will have spillover effects to the South African economy. Actually registered people from Zimbabwe in South Africa as a result of these economic challenges is about 250,000 registers that are working now, not the old ones, new ones. The ones that come in, you can go into the Beit Bridge. I spent a day the other day in the Beit Bridge. People work together. Just as there's a rail line there. People shop in South Africa, do all of these things. That's integration. So the challenges that are facing Zimbabwe have spillover effects in South Africa. A resolution of the Zimbabwean challenge is a resolution of the South African problem. We do have our own challenges. I was jealous when Minister of Finance was enumerating some of the changes and growth in Zimbabwe. I wished I could have a similar message. I don't. I've got my own electricity challenges, which have undermined my growth for the past 10 years. And as a result, some people think that we are in a middle-income trap, when the challenge, if you track our performance, has got to do with our electricity performance. So I was excited when you made those points and see that we are developing quite well. It's in our interest. So what is my message today? My message is simple, and I've said I'm not going to be saying a lot, is that when Dr. Adesina said, all of us who are here, he understands who are concerned about Zimbabwe. I want to join you and say you're correct. Our presence here is to demonstrate that concern about Zimbabwe. And therefore, a resolution of the Zimbabwean situation would be in our interest. A growth in the Zimbabwean economy is a fundamental challenge for all of us in SADC. I wanted just to send that message that we're particularly touched. We support this initiative with all our efforts. Thank you very much.
Another round of applause for Honorable Minister Kononga. I think it's a very important message from you, sir. Our next reactions and comments, I think we will invite the Executive Secretary of the Southern Africa Development Community, His Excellency Elias Makosi.
Thank you very much, Director of Ceremony, and a very good evening to Your Excellencies, dignitaries present here. Your Excellency, President Mnangagwa, Your Excellency, President Dr. Chisano, Your Excellency, President Adesina, and all dignitaries. And I want to write, if I'm allowed, on the protocol that was established by the Director of Proceedings and say all protocol observed. I think I'm in the same position that my distinguished minister from South Africa was in, to say when our elders and a very distinguished line of the leaders before us had spoken so eloquently and articulating issues in the manner they did, there is very little to say. But I think I've been saved, as he has been, by President Chisano's statement when he spoke about a thing. So I believe that I will share a thing or two, just in contribution to this important dialogue. SADC, if I were to state the position and commitment of the region, has been with the Republic of Zimbabwe through and through. And this has culminated in statements that have been conveyed repeatedly, year in, year out in October, articulating two positions. One, that sanctions that have been imposed on our sister country be removed without any restrictions or issues attached to them. And secondly, which is what all the two facilitator and the champion spoke about, that there ought to be a dialogue between the Republic of Zimbabwe and its creditors and all other stakeholders by extension. Your Excellencies, I'm from Botswana, and there is one saying in Botswana, I hope there are people here from that country, that there is a Setswana saying, "Molemo wa kgang ke go buiwa." Literally translated that you cannot solve any problem until you sit together and talk about it. You can talk from the tops of the mountains, the downs of the valleys, across oceans, until you come together face to face, engage, tough conversations. That is then that you are going to find each other. That is then that you are going to understand each other and agree on a common position that take the both of you forward. So I'm here with just two messages, if not three. One, that this development that has just been clearly articulated by our principals. First, President Mnangagwa's commitment to this process, and we really need to commend him for that because he has taken it himself to lead this process, as you've heard President Adesina. The facilitator himself, Dr. Chisano, spoke about this whole process. So I'm not going to repeat it, but I think it shows a commitment that not only have we come together to understand each other, to find each other with the creditors, we have now put something on the ground that will use collectively together to walk together towards what I would call one North Star or one goal. And I think that goal, if you've had all the conversations, is for Zimbabwe to be self-determined and, again, continue in her economic recovery and development. And by extension, the SADC region would then benefit from the success that Zimbabwe will have. So we are quite encouraged from the SADC as a region that there is this process, and it's an important process with those 16 indicators. We are here to make a statement, President Adesina, that we are here to collaborate with the bank, with yourself as a champion. We are here to partner with you. We are here to partner through our structures, organ structure with President Chisano, to engage with the creditors and all other stakeholders that might find themselves in the space of governance, peace and security. Zimbabwe is one of us. When Zimbabwe is pained, I think all of us are pained in the region, and that has been the message. I think oftentimes we think only of wars, as we do have, wars, a war in Mozambique, and we have a situation in DRC, and therefore we tend to focus on those because that's where the immediate need is. But Zimbabwe has been in great need. You had the many years that they have spoken about. I don't think we can allow the country again to continue in that trajectory. We are here pleased that our creditors, who are our partners, most of them, have agreed to find this common ground. And they must be commended for that, to have led this process and to be where we are together with us. It's pleasing that President Adesina has indicated that they've actually come up with those indicators. This is not going to be an easy journey, and I think he has also articulated that. It is going to have some pitfalls. It is going to have some pain, but that pain must be had, that ultimately the country, the region can actually come back and do better as it did in the past. One message I will say, and I think just to add on what President Adesina said, this is to prepare the citizens of Zimbabwe. I think the common citizens that may not be understanding some of the engagements that we have, it's important that they are warned ahead of time, they are prepared, and there is communication, even to the simplest of levels, for them to understand what the country is going to go through for the benefit of the country and for their benefit. So SADC is going to work with Zimbabwe, is going to support Zimbabwe. We have engaged with President Mnangagwa that we are here to partner with Zimbabwe as part of the implementation process as well. I just thought I should articulate this, Your Excellencies. You just spoken about elections. SADC plays a very key role in the delivery of elections in the region. We will be observing elections in 4 countries this year, inclusive of the Republic of Zimbabwe. And I think you've heard from President Mnangagwa that he has committed and promised that elections will indeed meet those parameters that would have been articulated to the country. We stand here to say the same thing. Our principles that are guided, 13 principles that include the areas that have been articulated here, we will be observing those. So a mission will be going in, as are other missions, to make sure that the elections in Zimbabwe are free and fair. I just thought I should just talk on this. I don't need to repeat everything else, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm also very optimistic. I see, as I said, we are moving beyond just talking a statement. As SADC, we now have concrete actions that we can work with and support the Republic of Zimbabwe to turn the corner and look. And I hope when you come here next year, or wherever we are meeting President Adesina and yourself as the champion, and President Chisano will be showing a different picture that shows progression beyond this space. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your comments. Our next contributor to the roundtable discussion is Her Excellency Akileshe Kapwepwe. Is that correct? Thank you, ma'am. Who is representing the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa. If you can come up, ma'am, and we can have your contribution.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, Excellency Dr. Emerson Mnangagwa, Excellency President Chisano, my dear brother, President of the African Development Bank, Dr. Adeshina, I should simply say I'll ride on the protocols that have already been established. It's indeed an honor for me and a privilege to be here for 3 reasons. One is that Zimbabwe is a founding member of Common Market for Eastern Africa and remains very active and an important player in regional trade. And I think can do more if we resolve this debt overhang. The other is that nobody says no to an invitation from Dr. Adeshina. It's very persuasive. And the third is that I'm actually the former executive director on the board of the IMF representing Zimbabwe from 2012 to 2016. So I have a particular interest in seeing something that we started working on many years ago finally come to fruition. Let me start by saying I appreciate greatly the high-level commitment to this process. I think everyone has talked about the impact of the debt overhang on the ability for Zimbabwe to fully achieve its potential. Even with the debt overhang, we've heard the figures, we've heard the growth. We've heard the fact that for growing wheat, for example, this is the example we can take. So if Zimbabwe is able to do this, even in this constrained space, then we can imagine what they will do once this debt resolution takes place. Secondly, apart from the very high-level commitment which has been demonstrated, but not only in speech, but in presence, for the President himself to be here in this roundtable really does clearly articulate his and his government's commitment to this process. The other thing that I needed to just also underscore is the clear roadmap of actions, frameworks, achieving the staff monitored program by the IMF, commitment to a supervised economic reform plan, sequencing of events of what the plan is going to do, a very clear strategy. And I think that when you have a very clearly articulated position and strategy, it is easier to engage others to buy into your plan or into your dream. And I think this has been clearly articulated reading through what Zimbabwe is proposing to do. I also welcome the formation of sector groups to track progress, because it's important, if you're going to stick to a plan, to track the progress, so that if you are indeed having challenges, you know how to quickly get back on plan, engage who you have to engage, so that we can make this process more achievable. So a lot has been said. My message really is to really welcome this initiative, which will really liberate on the economic front Zimbabwe and its ability to even achieve its great potential. The other thing that has, apart from the great efforts on the economic front, the other thing that I am pleased to note, of course, like everyone else, is the commitment to reforms, very clearly articulated economic reforms, reforms around the land tenure. These are also clearly demonstrating that this has been clearly thought out. If you look at the position of Zimbabwe and the long years of this debt overhang, I'll also bring a saying since so many sayings have been offered this evening. It says, how does one eat an elephant? One piece at a time. So there's been a clear articulation, a clear sequencing, a clear thought out of how we will get from point A to point B. And I think such an initiative and such a narrative can only attract support. At the same time, we have pointed out that this will not be an easy way, it will not be an easy journey, but I think with the level of commitment that we've seen, I am pessimistic that we'll be able to follow through. And lastly, I think I will also be adding my voice to welcoming the commitment by His Excellency the President to have a free and fair election in August of this year. As a region, we are also going to be involved, jointly actually with the African Union, to monitor the elections in Zimbabwe. This will really signal the commitment to reform and also, I think, bring more people to really believe in this process. So with that, I thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your remarks. Short, straight, and to the point. Our next contributor, ladies and gentlemen, is Mr. Edward Cullen, who is the UN resident representative, UN resident coordinator in Zimbabwe.
Excellency President Emmerson Mnangagwa, President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, His Excellency former President Joaquim Chissano, and facilitator of the area clearance and debt resolution process, my brother Dr. Adesina, President of the African Development Bank. Please allow me to stand on existing protocol, given the time constraints we have to deal with here. Mr. President, I must express my delight to be here in this historic resort city of Sharm el-Sheikh today. I had to fly from the United States straight to Sharm el-Sheikh to make sure that I'm part of this process. When my brother spoke, he has captured the critical ingredients of a structural dialogue of this nature and what we expect. But it's difficult for me to even go through my points. But I will paraphrase them because we have to remember that there are those critical ingredients that are so important. One, a whole of government approach. Two, demonstrated political will. Three, what I call a principle of engagement in my work. That is, you listen, you advise, and you accompany governments. There's no other exception story. When I was reassigned to Zimbabwe during my accreditation process, I was opportune to meet President Mnangagwa, and I was very clear from day one on the need for advocacy in trying to see how we can address the existing trust deficit that was holding Zimbabwe back. I can see progress that has been made in the space of 1 year in trying to put this into a better perspective through the engagement and re-engagement strategy of His Excellency. But let me look at opportunities in Zimbabwe. And I don't hesitate to say this from a Pan-Africanist framework of mind, because that is where I come from. And that's what I believe in, that indeed Zimbabwe is a promise for Southern Africa. And Zimbabwe can contribute to the emancipation of Southern Africa if it is given the chance to reproduce itself. When I took over my job during the last trade fair, I was very clear, and that was on International Multilateral Day, and I called for lifting of the sanction in Bulawayo. Oh my God. I was trailed by interventions with some opinion that my stance were premature. I didn't have any problem with this either. All I wanted to make, and that's the point my brother has made here today, and that has been made in several occasions by the Secretary General of the United Nations, that the coercive measures against Zimbabwe were and are not UN sanctions. We have to be very clear about that. And it is clear to us that a stifled country can neither deliver the sustainable development goals promises nor fulfill its development aspirations. During my learning process, since we have been talking about a lot of proverbs here, Your Excellency and my brother, there is one I also made comments to. That is recalling the killing of the mother ant anecdote that epitomizes the reality in Zimbabwe today. If you cushion the risk takers in an economy, how is that economy going to move? Who is going to take the risk? Those are the direct impacts of targeted sanctions. And these are realities we have to deal with moving forward. Your Excellency, something magical happened in the last 6 months. In my advocacy, I've been pushing the United Nations to try to see whatever we can do to make sure that the voices of Zimbabweans are heard louder and louder. Up to a point, I was able to convene an executive committee meeting on Zimbabwe at the secretariat level. And during that period, there was a commitment made to work on a step-by-step approach to try to see what the United Nations can do to support Zimbabwe. And guess what? The structured dialogue process has just preempted that whole process. So in fact, the structured dialogue is indeed a step-by-step approach in trying to find a solution to the key challenges of the government and people of Zimbabwe. So we are so happy that this process is going on. And my brother Adesina, I cannot say thank you more than what people have already said. Our sister, the Deputy Secretary General, is closely following you and following me too on what you guys are doing in Zimbabwe. She keeps telling me, we are watching you guys. You must deliver those goods that you are talking about in Zimbabwe. And I keep promising that it will be delivered. So that is my conviction at the end of the day. And I also want to welcome a concept of sweetener, which when I talked to former President Chisano, when we met briefly, I talked about a sweetener. In negotiations or dialogue of any nature, something has to give away to make the discussion more palatable, to get people to engage. And I'm so happy that efforts are being made to look at that issue of a sweetener and to make sure that if we don't have an okra, my brother, that we can still have some sweetener in the tea that could help us drink a very strong coffee, which is very important in this process. And I want to end on a message which I got from the Secretary General before coming here, that we are closely interested and following the progress in the debt and area clearance process in Zimbabwe. And please convey to the President and people of Zimbabwe that United Nations remains committed to their efforts in finding a solution to this, according to him, long outdated situation of this beautiful country. So my message is simple. The ingredients of a structured dialogue are on the table. And all what is left now is to see how we can pull together to make sure that Zimbabwe is given the chance to reproduce itself. And then, of course, ensure that Southern Africa benefits from this beautiful endowment of this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency. Our open floor discussion, which is the plenary session, I think we'll invite colleagues who may be in the room, who may have interventions, contributions to make. But I will start by asking if we've got anybody who's representing the IMF, World Bank in that order. And we can also, if a representative of the EU or Switzerland is in the room, we can also have contributions from there. The roving mics are ready, and then after those, we can also have anybody else in the room who wants to make a comment and say something about this thing to be allowed to do so. Mike, yeah. Yeah, right in front.
Thank you, Program Director, Your Excellency, President Mnangagwa, and former President of Mozambique, President Chisano, and our AFDB President Adesina, and Honorable Minister of Finance and other honorable ministers here present, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I take the floor just to add my voice on the update on the Executive Board meeting on Zimbabwe that was held on March 15, 2023. And some of the key messages includes the Executive Directors welcomed the progress that Zimbabwe made to exit from the FATF grey list. And also they urged them to continue their efforts to consolidate these gains and secure them to ensure financial integrity. Executive Directors also keenly await an SMP request from the authorities in line with the first pillar of the three-pillar approach. And they wait for a formal request so that they can anchor the reform efforts and support this structured dialogue platform. Then also Executive Directors were also interested in this structured dialogue platform as a lasting solution in the resolution of the country's debt in an amicable way to unlock international capital and unleash the country's enormous growth potential. So the fund awaits a move from the Zimbabwean authorities to see how they can support this process going forward. Thank you, Program Director. Also, just to wish the authorities great success in their reform efforts and this important work to amicably resolve the long-standing external payment arrears. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a lot of hands coming up. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Can I?
No, you can go ahead once you have a mic.
Thank you.
Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. My name is Buthena Gromazi. I'm Director for Regional Integration, and I'm representing Victoria Kwakwa, the VP for Africa East and Central from the World Bank. We congratulate the government of Zimbabwe for the leadership in advancing the structured dialogue platform in support of arrear clearance and debt resolution. It is encouraging to see the open and constructive dialogue that the government has with international partners, civil society organizations on its re-engagement journey. The World Bank remains committed to support Zimbabwe in reforms agreed through the dialogue process. We are happy to contribute to the Economic Reform Working Group and provide knowledge advisory services in key development areas. We are mobilizing resources through the recently approved Multi-Donor Trust Fund, ZSET, and other global funds to contribute building capacity in transformational higher impact areas. Across the work, we see that Zimbabwe has potential for accelerating economic growth with its excellent human capital and diverse and abundant resources. The reforms included in the 3 pillars and the pursued resolution of debt arrears will help Zimbabwe use this potential to achieve its development objectives.
Thank you very much for your statement.
Thank you. My name is Chris Athaid. Excellencies, President Mnangagwa, Shisana, and President Adesina. My name is Chris Athaid. I'm temporary alternate governor at the moment for the UK. Congratulations, first of all, to the government of Zimbabwe for working with Presidents Shisano and Adesina and creating an institutionalized, structured dialogue process to resolve debt and arrears. The improved dialogue is already building trust and understanding. The UK remains committed to engaging in the process in good faith. The UK welcomes the inclusive approach. It will be important to keep all international and regional players and domestic actors, political parties, civil society, and the private sector involved. We are reassured to hear that this will be a multilateral process with all creditors involved, in line with G20 commitments and elsewhere. The UK welcomes the reforms and outcomes the government of Zimbabwe has committed to across economic governance and land tracks. We support the use of internationally monitored outcome indicators. It is the achievement of these which will trigger arrears clearance rather than the reform actions alone. They will tell us if words and plans have been turned into action and results, ultimately measuring not by what is said, but what is done, and whether that leads to the desired outcome. We welcome that. Whilst they are grounded in Zimbabwe's National Development Strategy, NDS, they are indicators that will be independently and internationally monitored, so we don't need to debate the data. For governance, the UK is comfortable with 3 indicators chosen from the NDS, with a narrowed down set of 16 sub-indicators. We still need to agree the thresholds which need to be reached. For the economic track, we are comfortable with SMP outcomes to be defined in dialogue with the IMF, but already indicated to include market-based exchange rate and phasing out of quasi-fiscal operations. For land, outcomes are still to be defined, but to include resolution of BIPPAs, payment of global compensation deal, and creation of bankable 99-year leases. Whilst the UK does not have additional resources, our existing support, delivered through existing channels, is well aligned with the areas identified as needing support to manage any social impacts from an SMP. We look forward to seeing how the government of Zimbabwe will increase its allocation and disbursement to these key sectors. We have not seen the land compensation structuring idea, which would need to deal with the difficult issue of sovereign risk to succeed. The first critical milestone will be free, fair, and peaceful elections. That is essential for this process to move forward. Then, as President Shisano reminded people at the high-level forum in Harare, the hard work will really begin. Of the government implementing the reforms needed to hit the outcomes which can result in arrears clearance. We look forward to being part of this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's a hand at the back.
Your Excellencies, I will also stand on previously established protocols. My name is Aline Mugisho, and I represent the CGIR. I would just like to really encourage again and thank the Zimbabwean president from September last year to the Food Summit. To this moment, he's still very consistent in everything, and we're very much sure that you are going to get Zimbabwe into the glorious days anticipated. I would like to here commit my institutions into facilitating and increasing food production and accelerating those goals that you have set in climate smart agriculture, but above all, ensuring that the industry transformation highly needed is clearly supported. And the CGR, and the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, can certainly provide the technical backstopping to that development needed. Zimbabwe has suffered also from brain drain of its young people who are looking for greener pastures elsewhere, would like indeed to help the country to fast track the return of its highly skilled young people who would find hope and build this country that we dearly love. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Excellencies, Presidents, and ladies and gentlemen, my name is Nicholas Randen. I'm the alternate governor for Switzerland. And as it was mentioned, Switzerland is involved in this process in Harare through our embassy and has been, I think, very much interested to support Zimbabwe in this process. We want to congratulate the process that has been launched, and we want to reaffirm our availability to support anything we can as Switzerland in this process. We are co-chairing the group on land issue, and we are available for any other support. So thank you very much, and we are very proud of what's happening in Zimbabwe.
Thank you. Any other interventions?
Hey. Thank you. Good evening. I'm Eric Meyer. I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Treasury from Washington. And I want to take this opportunity to thank their excellencies, President Mnangagwa, former President Chissano, President Adesina, for your important remarks today, outlining both the challenges and the process that is being undertaken here. In thinking about whether to speak, I realize there's always a risk that the headline that comes out of it is the United States supports this thing or the United States opposes that thing. That's not what we're here to do. What we are here to do and what we welcome is the opportunity to participate in this strategic dialogue, because we think this is a process that presents an opportunity for Zimbabwe to work with its partners on charting a path to reform and measuring the progress along the way together. That's really important. For Zimbabwe to reach its ultimate goal of debt resolution, the discussions in the dialogue must be supported by actions, and we heard some of that discussed earlier today, this evening. It's imperative that Zimbabwe demonstrates credible progress in implementing governance, economic, and land reforms, not just reaching agreements with partners, but then delivering on those agreements. Building a track record of progress will take time, and it's going to be important that Zimbabwe stays the course through that process. I would note, and President Adesina mentioned, the Zadera Act in the United States. And that act does bind us in opposing lending from the international financial institutions and debt relief until certain criteria under Zadera are met. I want to just touch on for you really quickly what those criteria are. They are related to the rule of law, to free and fair elections and pre-election conditions consistent with international standards. They're related to land reform, and they're related to civilian authority over the military and the police. I think you'll notice that there's a lot of commonality between the working groups under the strategic dialogue that President Chissano outlined for us earlier this evening, and the conditions that my government is bound to meet and that we are monitoring and looking at. Until those conditions are met, we're not able to participate in financing options for Zimbabwe through the African Development Bank or otherwise. But we are participating in the strategic dialogue. And we're doing this because the importance of these reforms extends beyond debt relief. These reforms, if successfully executed and implemented, will create the conditions for a socially and economically thriving Zimbabwe. And that, frankly, is, I think, what we are all here together for. Thank you.
Still calling for interventions from the floor? If not, I will at this take the opportunity to call on Professor Mthembu, our Minister of Finance, to make a few responses and then call on Dr. Adesina to make closing remarks.
Thank you, Moderator, and thank you for those round of comment and contributions. As reiterated by His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe, President Mnangagwa, the government of Zimbabwe takes full ownership and remains committed to this arrears clearance and debt resolution process. And we intend to follow through on it through the three working groups and the policy reforms under those three working groups, economic reforms, governance reforms, and the land tenure issues. But there is some low-hanging fruit. I think it's clear that signing off a staff monitored program or a staff monitored program is low-hanging fruit, and the negotiations will begin. I heard Willie Nakunyada articulate that we are going to start that negotiation. And then the President of Zimbabwe was very clear that the elections will be free, fair, peaceful, and credible. That's all low-hanging fruit. The third low-hanging fruit is the drafting of the legislation that will provide for a transferable, valorizable, and tradable 99-year lease along the land tenure systems track. And the other is the implementation of the global compensation agreement with the farmers. We're working with the bank, with Dr. Adesina, looking at various structures that will enable us to front-load the payment to the farmers. And this also includes a resolution of the BIPA farms, or BIPA-governed farms. It's also part of that low-hanging fruit, which I think we can achieve in the short to medium term. Really, I want to commend the partners, thank them for supporting us in this process, for being part of this process. And I can assure you that our commitment to the process is unwavering from a Zimbabwe government point of view. I thank you. I now wish to ask Dr. Adesina to thank everybody and wrap up the meeting. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, Mr. President, Mnangagwa, I would like to thank you very, very much for your being here for this session. When people talk about commitments, and a head of state sits down for a couple of hours in a meeting, that shows huge commitment to this particular cause, and I think when we see that commitment, plus the statements you've made, it gives wind behind the sail. Mr. President, thank you for your leadership, your commitment, and thank you very much for being here personally with us in this dialogue to listen to what we have to say, comments, and suggestions of people. Please join me in thanking His Excellency the President. I would like to thank you, Your Excellency, President Chisano. Thank you very much for always being there, for your wise words. Thank you for also teaching us tonight that there are things and contributes to things, and we'll all continue to work together to make this thing work. So, Mr. President, thank you very much, sir. I want to thank the Minister of Finance, Professor Mtuling Nkube, who has really been quite resilient and very open in all the conversations that we are having. I want to thank you very much for taking the leadership and also for staying the course. And we heard from the IMF and how you're staying the course in those reforms are actually going to lead to the SMP that you will make a request to the IMF. So well done, continue, bon courage. Thank you very much, Minister. To the rest of the Zimbabwean ministers and cabinet members, thank you for being part of this. And your commitment, Minister of Justice, it's very much appreciated. And the Minister of Acting Minister of Foreign Affairs, thank you to all the rest of the government. Mr. Mvumbe of the Debt Management Office, thank you. You put all the data together. You organized many of these things. So thank you. Please continue to stay the course. Yeah. I need to thank all of our excellencies that are here today. Thank you, Eric. Thank you for coming, and thank you for your statement. We'll continue to work together on those issues. Thank you very much for IMF. Thank you very much, Your Excellency Sadak, the Commercer, my dear brother UNDP, and also Professor Muchanga, and all the excellencies that are here representing heads of institutions. Thank you for your commitment with us. You can see it's not something that we can do alone, but it's something that I'm convinced that we all have the heart for, we all have the commitment for, and we all have the patience to make happen. When somebody sows the seed, it's just that, it's just a seed. But you have to stay with the seed. You have to water the seed. You got to put some fertilizers on it. And then suddenly, it gets up and it yields the desired fruit. So all of you that are here today, you are part of the planting of that seed, the nurturing of this seed for a Zimbabwe, a new Zimbabwe, and support for Zimbabwe towards its arrears clearance. Thank you very much. Please accept on behalf of myself, President Chisano, our great appreciation. Thank you very much. And I just want to say that as an African who grew up in a village, I always see baobab trees. You know, it's giant baobab trees. And that's where the elders always sit and they tell stories and stuff. But you try and put your hand around a baobab tree. You can't. It's too big. So, although President Mnangagwa called me champion, but look, my hand is just like this. I can't. I need all the hands that are here to be joined together around Zimbabwe, for Zimbabwe to be able to know it's supported. And so I'm going to ask us, if you don't mind, to please rise. Kindly hold the hand of the person next to you. There's no COVID anymore, so that's okay. Yeah. And make sure you can be a little bit, yeah. So this is like our hands around Zimbabwe. So just say it after me. Together, around Zimbabwe. Let's do it. Thank you very much.